You're probably someone who likes to get to grips with complex topics, but, without spending ages wading through everything.
Absolutely.
Well, today on the deep dive, we're jumping into something really fascinating. It sits right at that intersection of history and faith. We're talking about the splitting of the moon, Shaq-ul-Qamar.
And our way into this today is specific. We're looking at excerpts from discussions with Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, the scholar.
Right.
And these sources, they offer a pretty nuanced perspective. It might be a bit different from, let's say, the more common understanding you might have heard.
Exactly. We're not just going over old ground here. The idea is to unpack Ghamidi's analysis. Look at how he interprets the event, the evidence, the different ways people understand it. Think of this as your shortcut, really, to getting well-informed on what can feel like a tricky subject.
A good place to start, I think, is probably with that widely accepted view first. Establish the baseline.
Okay.
Our initial source actually has Ahsan Ilyas laying this out, the traditional viewpoint.
Right. So the traditional take, as Ahsan explains it, it's pretty straightforward in its claim. It's based on narrations found in major hadith collections.
Bukhari, Muslim, Mustajik Hakim.
Exactly. And these are attributed to several Sahaba, the Prophet's companions, people who were actually there. And the core idea is, well, this splitting of the moon was a miracle, a huge sign, undeniable proof that the Prophet Muhammad was telling the truth.
And often tied into that narrative is the context of the mushrikeen, the disbelievers in Makkah.
Yes, the demand.
Right. Figures like Walid bin Mughira, Abu Jahal, Ais bin Wail. The story goes that they challenged the Prophet.
They wanted a sign, didn't they? Specifically split the moon.
Yes, split it, see parts on either side of a mountain.
Right.
Basically setting a condition for accepting Islam. That's the traditional framing.
Okay. Which then leads us nicely into Ghamidi's response, his initial approach.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting. He doesn't just dismiss miracles outright, does he?
No, not at all. But his starting point is very methodological, very careful. He really emphasizes the need for rigorous investigation. Like, first things first, where does the information come from? Is it in the Quran? Or is it from the narrations, the ahadith?
Okay, source first.
Source first. And then if it's ahadith, how authentic are they? Are they sahih, sound, or Hasan good?
So assessing the reliability.
Critically. For him, sound reasoning and a critical eye are just paramount. It's not about just accepting something because it seems to glorify the Prophet. It has to stand up to scrutiny.
Okay, so let's follow that method. He looks at the Quran first, and the key verse everyone points to is in Surah Qamar, right? Chapter 54.
That's the one, verses 1 and 2.
And the translation we're using is, the hour has drawn near and the moon has split in two. And if they see a sign, they turn away and say, this is continuous magic.
Right. So you see the context immediately. The surah is talking about Qiyamah, the day of judgment, being close. It's a warning.
And right there, it mentions the moon splitting. Now, Ghamidi and the scholars he often refers to, they pay really close attention to that word, ayah, translated here as sign.
Yes, exactly. Because ayah, in the Quran, as Ghamidi explains, it doesn't just mean one thing. It has several layers of meaning.
Like what?
Well, it can mean the verses of the Quran itself, obviously.
Yeah.
It can mean signs in the universe. The sun, the moon, creation itself points to God.
Okay.
It can mean miracles performed directly by prophets. Think of Moses' 9 signs mentioned in Surah Bani Israel.
Right.
And then there's a fourth category, extraordinary acts of Allah, but maybe not directly through a prophet on demand, like the manna and salwa for the Israelites, or the clouds giving shade, or even the birth of Isa, Jesus.
Okay, so Quranic verses, natural signs, prophetic miracles, or other divine acts. 4 possibilities.
Precisely. So the absolutely central question becomes, when Surah Qamar talks about the moon splitting and calls it an ayah, which of these meanings fits best?
Is it a miracle Muhammad performed? Or is it something else?
That's the core of the investigation. So keeping that Quranic verse and the meaning of ayah in mind, Ghamidi then turns to the narrations, the ahadith.
Right, to see how they line up.
Exactly. He mentions a specific collection by Abdullah Azmi Sahib, Al-Jamil Kamil Hadisis Sahih Shamil.
And that's known for being quite comprehensive and focusing on authentic narrations, isn't it?
Yes, it aims for narrations that meet those high standards, Hasan or Sahih. He looks at the section specifically on the splitting of the moon.
Okay, so what does he find there? What are the key narrations highlighted in that collection?
There are several important ones. One from Abdullah bin Masud. He says the moon split in two during the Prophet's era, and the Prophet's reaction, he just said, be witness, Shadi.
Be witness, not look what I did.
Exactly, just bear witness to this event. Another narration from bin Masud adds a bit more context.
Mm-hmm.
It says the Quraysh, the disbelievers, immediately dismissed it, called it magic. Magic by Ibn Abi Kabsha. That was a sort of derogatory name they sometimes used for the prophet.
Ah, yeah.
And they apparently said, well, let's wait for travelers. Magic might affect us here, but it can't affect everyone.
Right, so you have people coming from outside Makkah saw it too.
And crucially, that narration concludes that travelers did arrive later and confirmed they'd seen the moon split as well.
Interesting. Are there other accounts that are similar in the collection?
Yes, quite a few. Anas bin Malik narrates that the people of Makkah asked for a sign, and the Prophet showed them the moon split in two. He uses the word showed, and Mount Hira was visible between the parts.
Showed them. Again, not necessarily did it himself on command.
That's the nuance. Abdullah bin Abbas simply confirms, yes, the moon split in the Prophet's time. And Abdullah bin Umar also recounts the split, and again the Prophet saying, people be the witness of it.
What really jumps out, and Ghamidi points this out too, is what's missing from these core, seemingly reliable narrations.
Right.
Like the detail about the prophet pointing his finger and the moon physically splitting because of that gesture. That's such a common image, but it doesn't seem to be in these specific accounts Ghamidi is focusing on.
That's a really critical observation he makes. These Sahih Hasan narrations often lack those dramatic details found in more popular versions.
Okay, so Ghamidi then connects this analysis to the interpretations of two other major scholars, right?
Yes, Maulana Sayyid Abul al-Maududi and Imam Amin Ahsan Islahi. He explicitly states that his own understanding aligns pretty closely with theirs.
So what is their take then? If it wasn't necessarily a miracle performed on demand by the prophet, how do they interpret the event and the Quranic verse? It sounds different.
It is different from the simple miracle on demand view. They argue, yes, the splitting of the moon absolutely happened. It was an extraordinary sign, an ayah from Allah.
But its purpose was different.
Its primary purpose, in their view, wasn't just to satisfy the immediate demands of the mushrikeen. It was more profound. It was Allah demonstrating his power, affirming the nearness of Qiyamah, the hour mentioned in the verse, and confirming the truth of the prophet's warnings about judgment and the end times.
So less a specific response to a challenge, more a cosmic warning sign.
Something like that. A sign related to the overarching message of the surah, which is about Qiyamah. Allah showing a glimpse of the kind of cosmic disruption possible, reinforcing the prophet's message.
How do they handle the second part of the verse then? And if they see a sign, they turn away and say, this is continuous magic. Doesn't that sound like they saw something and dismissed it right then?
Absolutely. And that's key to their argument against interpreting the splitting as something only happening in the future near Qiyamah.
Oh, I see.
They say the verse structure mentioning the split and then saying if they see a sign, they turn away, strongly implies the disbelievers had already seen a sign, the splitting, and were dismissing that as magic.
So it connects the past event to their ongoing rejection.
Precisely. Their interpretation is that this incident occurred once, it was specific, happened about 5 years before the Hijrah, the migration to Medina.
Okay.
Probably on a night with a full or near full moon, the 14th lunar night is often mentioned. The moon appeared to, well, rupture or split briefly, then rejoin.
And the prophet's role
was to point it out. To say, Ishadu, be witness. Witness the sign from God.
And those popular stories, the finger pointing, the moon going into his sleeves or collar, what do Maududi and Islahi say about those?
They generally regard those details as lacking a strong basis in the most reliable narrations. They consider them likely later additions or perhaps misunderstandings, not part of the core authenticated event. They focus on what the Sahih accounts actually report.
Okay, focusing on the core event. The moon splitting, people witnessing it, the prophet calling attention to it as a sign, and the disbelievers calling it magic.
That's the picture they paint, based on their analysis of Quran and Hadith.
Now, this interpretation, while maybe resolving some issues around the miracle-on-demand aspect, definitely raises other questions, doesn't it? Particularly from a modern scientific perspective.
Oh, absolutely. The obvious objections come up. How could the moon split? Wouldn't that have catastrophic effects? And if it happened, why isn't it recorded in, say, Chinese or other astronomical records from the time?
Exactly. Big questions. How do Maududi and Islahi, and by extension Ghamidi, address this skepticism?
Maududi tackles this directly. He makes several points. First, he doesn't rule out the possibility of significant planetary or celestial disruptions, even in ancient times. We don't know everything about cosmic history.
Okay.
Second, he emphasizes the likely brief and unexpected nature of the event. It wasn't necessarily a long, drawn-out affair that astronomers globally would have been tracking.
More like a sudden transient phenomenon?
Perhaps. He also points to the limitations of historical record-keeping back then, especially in that specific region. And crucially, the moon wouldn't have been visible everywhere on Earth at that exact moment. It would have been nighttime in Arabia and surrounding areas, but daytime elsewhere.
So limited visibility, limited recording capacity.
And he does mention a potential historical reference from Malabar in India, though the details around that are sometimes debated. But his point is, the lack of universal records doesn't automatically disprove eyewitness accounts from the location where it was visible.
What about the scientific angle today? People quote NASA scientists saying there's no geological or physical evidence on the moon itself, suggesting it was ever split in two.
Right. Both Maududi and Islahi touch on this, maybe Islahi more philosophically.
How so?
Islahi cautions against what you might call chronological snobbery, judging past events solely by present scientific knowledge or capabilities. Ancient observation methods were different. Our understanding of physics and cosmology evolves.
So absence of current evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence.
Kind of. He stresses the trustworthiness of the Sahaba, the companions, as historical witnesses for events of their time. Their collective testimony is a form of historical record. He also leaves open the need for future discoveries. Who knows what science might uncover down the line? And importantly, both scholars circle back to that Quranic verse itself. The verse predicts the reaction. If they see a sign, they turn away and say, this is continuous magic.
So the skepticism itself is almost presented as an expected part of the narrative.
In their reading, yes. The denial is foreseen. Their focus remains on it being understood as a divine sign, occurring in a specific historical context, witnessed by people whose testimony is considered reliable within the Islamic tradition. Whether it fits neatly into 21st century physics isn't their primary concern.
It's more about the theological significance and the historical testimony from that time.
Precisely. And Ghamidi, in presenting these views, really underscores an academic principle he values.
Which is?
Accepting well-reasoned arguments based on careful study of the sources, even if they come from scholars you might disagree with on other issues, or if the conclusion differs from, say, a more popular belief. It's about the strength of the reasoning.
Right. Intellectual honesty, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. To summarize our deep dive today, we've explored this really intriguing event, the splitting of the moon, Shaq-ul-Qamar. We looked at it through the Quran, through narrations, and specifically through the lens Ghamidi offers, which aligns closely with scholars like Maududi and Islahi.
And that view emphasizes it not so much as a miracle performed by the prophet on demand, but as an extraordinary sign from Allah.
A sign pointing towards the nearness of Qiyamah, the day of judgment, confirming the prophet's core message.
Based on a careful sifting of the historical accounts, prioritizing the most reliable narrations.
Our goal here was really to give you a clear, structured way into this complex topic, kind of a shortcut to being informed about the different layers of interpretation.
Yeah, hopefully it gives you a good handle on the arguments and the evidence discussed.
So we definitely invite you to think about these perspectives. What stands out to you from this discussion? Does one interpretation resonate more?
Maybe it sparks your interest to look into the original sources Ghamidi discusses, or find other discussions on the topic.
And just as a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over. If an event, something that seems to defy normal explanation, was genuinely witnessed by numerous people in one place and time, yet it doesn't leave unambiguous traces for later scientific verification or universal historical records, what does that really tell us? Does it primarily speak to the nature of the event itself? Or perhaps more about the inherent limitations of human observation, memory, and the sheer patchiness of historical documentation across centuries and cultures?